The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Remember that show back then? Remember that show? Turn on the TV, time was always flying. Why did they have to end so many shows you forgotten? Now that we've got a podcast, we can release all the shows from our hands. Yeah, will you be the most TV dudes you'll ever listen to? As long as we keep on talking sitcoms and cartoons from back in the day. Okay, we confess, we're obsessed, but we got a podcast to help you remember that show.
Hey there, TV lovers, and welcome to episode 25 of Remember That Show, a podcast where we revisit the obscure or forgotten TV shows of the 80s and 90s. This Thanksgiving season, I'm just thankful that Thelma Harper isn't my mama, because I'm William Bruce West.
And wondering when we'll get a Mama's Family revival with Vicki Lawrence that requires no wigs or makeup. I'm Adam. But before we discuss today's sitcom, we have to take a trip back into our own TV-obsessed childhoods in a segment we call Theme Song. So our show today stars an elderly character who's a real handful. Will, do you have a favorite grandma, grandpa, or just plain old person character from TV history?
Yeah, this one's tough for me because, one thing I really loathe, it is, I hate it. It started in the 90s. It's that trope of grandma who does too much, like grandma who rollerblades or grandma who does a hip hop dance class. Basically, I'm talking about Mother Winslow, but it travels to other shows. Like if you ever watch Big Bad Beetleborgs, the grandma on that show is the same trope. It was very common, even to some extent Mona from Who's the Boss, because the first season she's kindly old zombie lady who rides a bike, and then second season she's this sex pot that comes out of nowhere. So the era we cover made it really hard to like grandparents. So mine actually predates our normal range. My favorite grandma is Granny Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies.
Wow.
My grandmother actually introduced me to that show. I used to get sent to Alabama with her in the summers, and it was just in syndication there. We didn't have it in Maryland. I'm like, what's this show? She's like, oh, it's the Beverly Hillbillies, and Granny's a mess. And she was. There are shades of grandma who does too much. She would drink some moonshine or something and race through the property, and you're like, oh, that's cartoony, but it wasn't as just in your face obnoxious as the Mother Winslow kind of thing. So I always go back to Granny Clampett. I love that show so much. But how about you?
Oh, it's interesting. I was going through my mind as well because there's so many, and it's Abe Vigoda. But no, Abe Vigoda is the stereotypical old guy on TV, but I didn't watch any of the shows he was on. So I say if animation is on the table, an animated primetime sitcom, I love Cotton Hill, Hank's dad from King of the Hill. There's so many elements to him that make me laugh. First off, he sounds like Dana Carvey's impression of Ross Perot. Hello, what are you doing, Hank? And then he is hilariously prejudiced against women, minorities, and pretty much anyone that's not him. It's just the world to him. He's just against everybody. Everybody's stupid. Then there's the fact that he only calls Peggy Hank's wife. Hello, Hank's wife. And then he's a veteran of way too many wars. He was in every war, but most specifically, his shins were blown off in World War II by Japanese guns.
Tojo took my shin.
I love that he cut him down from 6'2" to 5'0". Also, he just looks and acts like an angry kid, and that cracks me up too. So it's just Cotton Hill is just the best old guy.
That's a great choice. I always think back to that one clip where you think he's about to get really abusive. It's what did you say? What did you say? Then he tunes up his hearing aid. What'd you say, baby cakes?
Yeah, we should mention he also married a much, much, much younger woman. Yeah.
And has a new baby who's like his favorite son. Well, we're in the Thanksgiving season here in the USA, and American TV loved to run marathons of classic series during the holidays when people were too sleepy from turkey and stuffing to get up off the couch. Adam, do you have a favorite TV marathon memory?
Most vividly, I remember watching the Twilight Zone marathon that would run on New Year's Day. And the first time I caught it was like 1993, 1994, something like that. And I'd always seen references, or parodies of the Twilight Zone, but we didn't have regular reruns in my area except when these marathons hit. And so like from that time forward throughout the 90s, I was always tuning in. And it was just fun to really see what it was all about and how many actors and people I recognized, like Burgess Meredith and his classic one, where he finally had all the time in the world to read at the end of the world, but he broke his glasses and all that kind of stuff. There's this other one like Next Stop Willoughby, like this guy who travels back in time when he falls asleep on a train. Like, I don't know, there's just a lot of neat little things here and there. So years later, I did buy the Twilight Zone box set to relive those memories of the marathons. But I mean, even to this day, it still goes on. It's still a thing. What about for you, though?
I need to find that because, like, I've only seen clips of Twilight Zone. Like, I know all the like famous episodes, like the ones with like Shatner and all that, but I've never seen a whole episode before. So,
Whoa.
yeah, that's my blind spot.
I was going to say, I know you watched The Outer Limits in the 90s, but
I was the Pepsi, not the Coke. but like speaking of Shatner, I guess I have two examples. The first marathon memory I have was I remember the weekend that Star Trek The Next Generation debuted, there was like an original series marathon. And it was weird because it was like, it seemed like, I don't know, maybe this was like the first time original series like really got like a national syndication push. I know it's always been in syndication, but like this seemed more organized. But I remember like that was when I was introduced to Star Trek really, because like I didn't have anyone in my life who was into that sort of stuff, And I mean, this doesn't come out a lot, but I guess I'm like a closet Trekker. That was like the first fan base where it's like, don't get so weird in public. Like we don't need them to know we're like this, So it's like over time I learned to just keep it secret, but that's like a very big part of my life. So yeah, just like being introduced to the original series, which then led me into Next Gen, which then Deep Space Nine, and then I skipped Voyager and all that stuff, But like the more recent one, and it's not even really recent, but I have a special place in my heart for Fox Kids. I was a charter member of the Fox Kids Club. From the middle to the end, they did what was called the Fox Kids TV Takeover, which was the day after Thanksgiving. They would do this like marathon of like episodes that were supposedly chosen by us. I don't really believe it because it was an antiquated, like we had to send a postcard and vote for what we wanted to see there, and it was always miraculously X-Men and Power Rangers and like the shows that like you knew were the most popular anyway. So like I always looked forward to that. They were never new episodes, they weren't even great episodes, but like that to me, you know how like Black Friday kicks off like the holiday shopping season, like to me the Fox Kids TV Takeover kicked off the Christmas season, and like that was probably the first time I would see the Fruity Pebbles Santa commercial for the season, or my favorite board game that I never owned, but Dizzy Dizzy Dinosaur, things like that. That's why that held a special place, but also closet Trek fan, closet Power Ranger fan. Power Rangers got on this weird schedule where like the seasons started ending the week before Thanksgiving, which was really weird because that means kids were getting toys for Christmas of a show that was over. But like what would happen was on the TV Takeover, that's where you would see like the Christmas special. And Christmas specials for a while were not in continuity. They were made to be sold straight to video and that kind of deal. So it was like a story that didn't matter, but it was still like a Ranger adventure you probably hadn't seen. So like I started looking forward to the countdown just for that. And it meant I didn't have to like go buy this VHS tape. So yeah, those are my marathon memories basically.
Yeah, I didn't even think about those because I've always heard of the TV takeover, but I don't think I ever tuned in. So now to know what it was all about, that's awesome. Well, for those of you who didn't tune in to Mama's Family, we're going to start getting into the history here and let you know what it was all about. But we also got to take a look at what was the viewing habits of the American people at this time when Mama's Family got the green light. Well, as we've discussed often on the show here, Will, family-based sitcoms were a staple of television from the beginning. So the basic concept of Mama's Family wouldn't have stood out in the 80s television world at all. But much more of a selling point was the pedigree of the characters and the cast, because the Carol Burnett Show was a very popular sketch comedy variety show series that ran on CBS from 1967 until 1978, had a brief revival in the 90s, but it had a cast consisting of people like Carol Burnett and Harvey Korman, Lyle Wagner. I always wondered where he came from. I've heard that name forever. He was on the Carol Burnett Show. Tim Conway was a regular guest, and of course, Vicki Lawrence, who was just 18 years old when she was hired to appear on the series. And of course, Lawrence would go on to portray Mama as the character in a series of sketches. We're going to talk about that more in a bit. But Will, you've mentioned this in the past. I know that this series has a very special place, not just in your heart, in your life. So what is your connection to the Carol Burnett Show?
So, like, my mom always likes to tell people that, like, there was a TV waiting for me when I came home from the hospital from being born. And that's true. Like, there was an old black and white TV in my, like, nursery. And people will say, like, I'm lying because we're not supposed to remember that far back. But I have, like, scattered memories of being in a crib with this TV on, and this is like late at night. So based on when the show ran, I would say these were in syndication at the time. So we're talking like 81, 82. But I remember seeing Harvey Korman. Like, that is like a fleeting memory of mine. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know if he was special or not. But, like, I felt I had this, like, mystical connection to Harvey Korman. I was probably, like, 15 when I found out who he really was. But it's like I would see him in glimpses like Blazing Saddles, you know? Or if you ever saw, like, the NBC series The Nut House. Or even, like, High Anxiety. But, like, at a point where I could, like, put a name to a face of, like, that's the guy from The Crib. So then it's like after that you learn about like his work with like Tim Conway, and then so I kind of worked backwards to the Carol Burnett Show. Even though I was like watching it when I like can't remember things, I rediscovered it later in life. So that's kind of like my connection to it. It's all down to Harvey Korman.
Wow, that is interesting. Yeah, because yeah, he is an actor who yeah, I've heard the name and I hear him referenced by a lot of comedians and things like that. And yet, like I only know that he existed here. And I was aware that the show was a thing because I would flip past it. Like there were reruns of the Carol Burnett Show like during summers of elementary school. And I remember like, wasn't there like an animated maid that like would push a broom across the screen? Isn't that part of the credits?
Yeah, yeah. But even like, I never even watched it then. You know how I became more familiar with it? Was that to me was one of the first series that Time Life tried to compile. You know, there were always those commercials, and even in, you know, in thrift stores now, you will always find like a disc of the best of the Carol Burnett Show. Like they never did the complete series. They did like 87 discs of the best of, you know.
Yeah, I literally just like probably 2 weeks ago saw a whole row, like a whole shelf that was all Carol Burnett. And I was like, what is this? And here's the other thing. Like I mentioned this last episode when we were talking about Punky Brewster. I watched the VHS of Annie a lot as a kid. I would like rent that from the library and bring it home. And Carol Burnett is always just going to be Miss Hannigan to me. That's really all I know her from. And like I knew Tim Conway, like the Apple Dumpling Gang. And then Vicki Lawrence, obviously I knew her from Mama's Family. We're going to talk about that. But specifically when I knew who Vicki Lawrence was, I was a random kid watching her 90s daytime talk show. And I really liked her talk show. I wasn't watching Ricky Lake. I wasn't watching Oprah or Montel. I was watching Vicki Lawrence for some reason, the Vicki Show. But really, like the Carol Burnett Show itself is not a part of my TV watching history. I couldn't tell you a skit. I couldn't tell you what they were famous for. So like that's what's really interesting to me is like it's such like a staple of a certain generation, but not necessarily ours.
I mean, as far as the skits go, it's like the family skit, but like the main thing I think the Carol Burnett show is known for is the ear tug. Like at the end of every episode, she would like tug her earlobe, and apparently that was like a secret like hello to someone in her family. I used to know the story there, but it's kind of taken on a life of its own, you know? So it's like the same way you have the goodbyes at the end of SNL, you'd have the ear tug at the end of Carol Burnett. But like I was watching Vicky's talk show. We'll have to do a talk show episode because there are a lot of people who didn't deserve them, like Marsha Warfield. You know? It's like, we need to do those one and done talk shows.
Definitely.
Well, what would eventually become Mama's Family began as a skit in the seventh season of the Carol Burnett show called The Family that aired in 1973. It was meant to be just a one-off sketch where Vicki Lawrence played an unaffectionate mother to the character of Eunice, played by Carol Burnett. It proved so popular that the series kept producing new sketches for years, featuring an ever-expanding cast of characters that were part of the family. These sequel sketches were so fondly remembered by audiences that a TV movie prequel called Eunice, featuring the original Carol Burnett show cast members, aired on CBS in 1982 to great ratings, despite being more of a drama than a comedy. Adam, what do you think of these sketches and the Eunice film? Had you seen them before?
Definitely not. Like I said, I'd never seen the Carol Burnett show in full. Definitely did not know growing up that Mama's Family came from an actual sketch, you know, like that there was something going on there. I knew some of the cast members had been on that show, but I didn't realize it was so formed. So it was interesting to me to watch it here, to see the basic setup. Obviously, the mama character, very much like from the beginning, Vicki Lawrence had that. But to see like all these other characters, like the fact that Carol Burnett was the star, so Eunice is kind of like a central figure and everything. You know, Harvey Korman playing her husband Ed. The only thing was, these were so long. Like these like 15, 25-minute sketches sometimes. You're just like, it's a play. They're just doing a play. And some of them are funny and some of them are just everybody bickering. So like that was kind of off-putting to me, where I was just like, why did people think this was funny exactly? You know, like they're just kind of annoying, especially Eunice. The Eunice character is very annoying.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously the mama character is the one with the zingers, so I see why she was the breakout character, but they all feel more awkward than funny to me, but especially the Eunice movie, because it deals with how pathetic and terrible their lives are over many decades. It's the Eunice character becoming a lush who's married to a loser, and you're like, oh no, it's very sad at the end, you know? You're just like, my goodness. So yeah, I just thought it was a very strange, the directions they chose to take it. Why? I thought you were supposed to, you know, entertain us with funny, but no, that wasn't their main focus. But what about you? Like you watched through Eunice, I know as well. Like,
Yeah, I mean, as far as Mama's Family went, I knew there was a network incarnation and there was a syndicated incarnation. I knew the character had its origins on the Carol Burnett show, but I didn't realize how many. Kind of like The Simpsons on Tracy Ullman. Like this wasn't just like a one or two time thing. There are a lot of the family sketches. And like I didn't know about Eunice till we started researching for this episode. And I watched it and it kind of changed my impression of the entire franchise. And honestly, for the better. Like I know you're saying that like is this downer and like they're supposed to make us laugh. The thing I find interesting about Eunice is that we call it a prequel, but it's not. It's kind of like Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, in relation to the show, whereas like these characters are familiar, but the events don't necessarily happen in continuity. Like there are 4 acts to Eunice, and Mama dies in Act 4. So having this in 1982, after the Carol Burnett show has like finished, the revival has finished because it came back for one summer in like 79 and 80. So I think it's 2 summers as Carol and Friends, you know? So it's like they had finally put the Carol franchise to rest. So it's like, okay, let's give these characters a send-off. And then wouldn't you know it, then it spawns Mama's Family. But like the interesting thing about Eunice also is that it reuses jokes from the family sketches, note for note, to the point where it's like, okay, these jokes might have been like hits when people watch the Carol Burnett show, but you just don't like insult your audience by regurgitating. Like, there are actually two family sketches that redo the same joke that's in Eunice. So some of these you're seeing for the third time. Like, I know we're not here to talk about Eunice per se, but it was an interesting project in that it is a drama. It's a Tennessee Williams stage play with a laugh track. So it's very jarring, but it's also very powerful, I thought.
If you're invested in that, it's just like if you're working backwards, though, from the Mama's Family sitcom and then going to that, it's very hard to accept. But as a piece of dramatic, storytelling, yeah, I mean, they hit those notes. Carol Burnett is all in on playing this pathetic and broken character, so you really can get invested if you can get past that it's its own thing.
Like, she should have won an Emmy for that. And I can't believe that they act like Vicky was nominated for an Emmy for supporting. And she does like Mama, like what we're used to. But like, Carol acts her ass off in that movie. Like, it was that incredible to me. So I don't know. Eunice is on YouTube for you people out there. Check it out if you're curious. But yeah, it was an amazing thing to find.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, though. We have to figure out, how did they get from sketches, a TV movie, into a sitcom that ran for many seasons? So we got to find out what they were pitching to the world in their elevator pitch. Mama's Family debuted on NBC in 1983, although it was conceived as early as 1975 after the sketches had proved to be popular. But Vicki Lawrence said she didn't want to play an old lady in a fat suit for an extended period of time. But when they finally launched in 83, this original version of the series ran for 2 seasons. Obviously, Vicki Lawrence was playing the widowed Thelma Harper Mama character. You had Ken Berry portraying her son Vint, who was moving back home after a divorce, and Betty White as the recurring character of Thelma's daughter Ellen, both of whom were part of the Eunice TV movie, although Ken Berry was not playing Vint, right? Like, he was a different type of character, but he had been pulled into the fold, which must have been confusing as well for people. Then back as special guest stars for a few episodes were Carol Burnett as Eunice and Harvey Korman as her doofus husband Ed. Now, new to the family cast, though, we had Rue McClanahan as Thelma's live-in sister Fran, as well as Vince's teenage children Buzz, played by Eric Brown, and Sonia, played by Karen R. Gould. And the first 4 episodes or so of the series really build up to the wedding of Vint and Thelma's flirty next-door neighbor, Naomi, played by Dorothy Lyman. Each episode basically found the family bickering and then getting into standard sitcom hijinks after that point. I mean, but still, maybe with a little bit more of a dramatic take. Will, did you actually watch this original incarnation of the series? Did you see these first 2 seasons in reruns at all?
In reruns, definitely. I mean, they're part of the syndication package, but I hate these seasons, mainly because even back in the early days, that's my OCD thing. I'm really into continuity. So like, it bothers me, just like the junior high Saved by the Bell stuff, it bothers me that like I grew up with Bubba and then I go back and I'm like, who are Buzz and Sonia and what happened to them, And it's just like, I don't think anything in real life even happened. Like, this is the part of the show where like you or someone comments like, oh yeah, Karen Argood got killed in Friday the 13th part 7. But it's like, if anything, that was like the trajectory of their careers. They didn't pop up elsewhere to big success. It's the same thing we've talked about with Punky and with Saved by the Bell. These seasons are very brown. And it's not even about like it being a dramedy or that kind of thing. They're just drab. And like, once it hits syndication, it brightens up like every other show when it hits syndication. So growing up, I just preferred the syndicated episodes, but I was definitely aware of these.
Oh, that's interesting, because I had never come across these episodes when I was a kid. So this was a revelation to me in terms of just how different it was at the beginning. Like, because it's like learning your grandma grandma was married to someone else before your grandpa, then seeing pictures of that version of the family, it just feels off. It's unfamiliar. You're like, there's grandma. Yeah. There's my uncle from that marriage, I guess. Oh, I never knew that. It's like, it's weird stuff like that. So most of all to me, learning that Rue McClanahan and Betty White were on a series together pre-Golden Girls, that was just crazy to me. I'm just like, what? Like,
this isn't even their only show pre-Golden Girls. They worked together on Maude.
wow.
And that means 3 of them worked together before Golden Girls.
Man,
so like
that is...
In fact, like researching for this episode, it turns out that like part of the reason Rue jumped to Golden Girls was she hated this role. Because this role made her a spinster. And when she was on Maude, it was a high-rated, sophisticated show that like tackled the issues. And then she comes to this where like apparently they had big plans for Fran until they cast Dorothy Lyman. And they were like, oh, she's got something to her. So they put all the like spicier personality traits onto Naomi. So like that left Rue McClanahan just miserable. So when the Golden Girls came calling, she was like deuces, and she left.
Well, it makes sense, yeah, because she literally, that character is just a wet blanket. She never adds any fun to the plots. She's just complaining all the time. She's just like this weird, timid, anxious Southern belle. Whereas, yeah, like you see the Naomi character, and you're like, oh, well, that's the Blanche, like
right.
we're not getting that from her. But I mean, we got to talk about how they transformed it then, because they realized, yeah, this is not working somehow, especially 25-year-olds playing like 14-year-olds, like it just doesn't make sense with Sonia, especially because like she starts out as this tomboy and she wore like baseball shirts and baseball hats and always has her earphones on. And then the next season, they just change her to an average, like seemingly college age woman. And she's just boring. Like she's less offensive. Still doesn't work. Why is she here?
Right. Well, I mean, after achieving only lackluster ratings, Mama's Family was canceled in 1984 and began playing in reruns throughout 1985. The reruns proved to be more popular than the original network run, which prompted the series to be retooled for syndication, premiering in 1986 with a few familiar and also brand new faces. Back were Mama, Vinton, and Naomi, but the first episode said farewell to Fran by revealing that she had died between seasons and revolved around her funeral. Taking Fran's place as Mama's best friend and comedic foil was Beverly Archer as nosy neighbor Iola. Also gone were Vince's kids Buzz and Sonia, replaced by Eunice and Ed's hunky but dim-witted son Bubba, played by Alan Kaiser. This version ran in first-run syndication for 3 years and 100 episodes until 1990, becoming the highest-rated first-run syndicated series on the air at one point. Adam, do you have memories of watching this version of Mama's Family?
Oh, definitely. So this was not anything like, obviously it was running in syndication, but it wasn't like prime time anywhere, where I was. So this was always, like sometime in the afternoon, and I would just flip it on. I was like, oh, Mama's Family is here. Like it always made me happy. But I gotta say, the core of the show for me was always Iola and Mama playing like an elderly Laverne and Shirley. That's what I always felt like. They got along. It wasn't like they were bickering with each other, but they were just such different attitudes. They worked so well. And then, yeah, Bubba and his goofy suspenders over a t-shirt look. It always makes me now looking back, it's like Stanley Spadowski in UHF. That was some 80s weird guy look. I want to know if anybody was really doing that as like a legitimate thing. And then obviously I remember Vint and Naomi being lovey-dovey, like that. They were always just kissing each other or whatever. But the episode that always stuck out in my mind is Mama Mania, because I was already a big fan of Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling at this time and always trying to find it like in the TV guide or on a Saturday, like because it was always switching channels in my area. But they appeared on so many sitcoms in the 80s and 90s. Most people just think of Married with Children, but they were on a lot more than that. And this one had Matilda the Hun, aka Queen Kong, and Mountain Fiji from Glow. They were wrestling Mama and Naomi, who were filling in for a tag team that one of Naomi's high school cheerleading friends was a part of that. And then her partner gets injured, so Naomi fills in, but then Mama accidentally hurts the actual friend. So now she has to fill in the match. And like you see her feisty moves. And trash talking and everything. Like it was just so that kind of crossover in my mind really stood out. Like I was like, oh, this is so cool. But what about for you? Like what did Mama's Family mean to you at this time?
Oh yeah, I mean this was first run syndication for me. Like you said, it was Saturdays at like 4 before or after wrestling. It was comfort food. Like when I think of Mama's Family, I always default to this era. It made the most of being in syndication by forcing those crossovers like Glow and Jeopardy and Family Feud. Like Iola had a crush on Alex Trebek. Like this is Mama's Family to me. There are certain aspects of it that are like nebulous where how old is Iola? Because like you said, they're kind of like an elderly Laverne and Shirley, but I always got the impression that Iola was younger than we were supposed to think. It was just she was so sheltered. Like she comes in these like they're not sundresses, they're like just like
I love Lucy dresses. Yeah.
yeah, like buttrick patterns, and like she'll have a picnic basket and she'll talk about like, well, mother's feet are hurting today, that kind of thing. And you said that like Vinton and Naomi were lovey-dovey. No, they were horny. They were the horniest couple on television. And he always come and be like, hey there, Skeeter. And he'd like
Yeah.
hug her from behind, Like this is what I think most people remember Mama's Family being, and like I see why this was successful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's got something special to it. I do want to say also, I'm sure it was a part of your viewing because I've mentioned this in the past, but you have given me your childhood, VHS tapes that you recorded Power Rangers and all these Fox Kids shows on. But I'm taking all the commercials out of that. And during a certain period, there are a ton of Mama's Family promos, and I'm putting those on our social media so people can see those because it's just so funny what they did to make Mama's Family look 90s and hip, like and it was the hip grandma syndrome you were talking about.
It was the on-ramp to that. I gave her a pass because she was the first, but as I kept seeing it, it was like, okay, you're not rollerblading. You have a new hip, you know.
All right, well, we got to find out what worked. Why was this version our version of Mama's Family? What made it so memorable in that comfort food? So let's get into our cheers. I will say this, just starting off, Ken Berry as Vinton is definitely the most likable character of the series. He's not abrasive. He's not annoying. He's meek, he's kind, but he's stupid. And that's where most of the humor comes from. He's just kind of simple. And I've never seen him in anything but this. I only know him from Mama's Family, but I like that he is the most consistent. From his first appearance to the end of the series, he doesn't get full on screeched where, he's like smart and then he becomes a dummy. He starts out stupid and he ends stupid. That's just the reality of the character. But he's still likable. You don't feel like, oh, this guy's a doofus. How could he exist? It's just like he's simple and he's sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah. I got thoughts on that, and I'm trying to figure out like it's not a cheer, it's not a jeer. It'll probably come up in let's save it for show doctors. But like I agree with you there. He's the most consistent and tied into that. This show does what syndication is supposed to do, where this is a show you can drop in anywhere. With the exception of the series finale, like, there's really no way to tell what season you're watching. Most shows, it'll be like, oh, it's a new season because they got a new haircut, or, oh, Matthew Perry gained some weight over the summer, that kind of thing. Like, that didn't happen here. And I mean, the part of that is because of how syndication is made, in that like you get an order for like 100 episodes and you just blow those out. So it's like you're not doing a whole like, oh, we filmed 26, we went on vacation, we came back. There's not a whole lot of time for like visual evolution. It looks the same the whole time. Like, this is what first run syndication was supposed to be. You can drop in at any time. When we were talking about this, I told you, like, you watch 5 of these, you've seen them all. Like, especially from this era. Like, the network seasons, those are a different animal. But here, any Mama's Family is indicative of the quality of Mama's Family.
You have to praise them also for, even though towards the end of the series, there is a baby plot line, there's not a child that started out on the series, like, yes, it was weird that they cast like a 22-year-old guy as supposedly someone who just got out of juvenile hall, in the Bubba character, but nobody ages. Like you said, like nobody looks older at any point. And so you're just like, yeah, that was smart. Because if they had a kid, you'd know, oh, now they're a teenager, now they're a young adult. They would ruin it. But like you say, it is perfect, syndicated television. Now, I also got to say that for the characters, there's so many great ones that they added for syndication. And Iola is just like a fantastic sitcom character to me. She has the cartoony voice. She's got just that look, that really delivers, like in her expressions and everything, time after time. Like I'm always drawn to her on screen. Someone like Ethel on I Love Lucy, she doesn't really deliver. She's there to let Lucy be crazy. Iola is equally as funny as Mama in her own way. And I love like just the fact that, yeah, she's timid, but like they are a great team because, she does have her opinions. It's just she says them in a different way than Mama might.
Definitely. I mean, the Iola character is almost like she was created in a lab because you do have your aspects of Ethel. You have your like Laverne and Shirley vibe. You've even there's a strong through line from Miss Jane Hathaway from the Beverly Hillbillies. You can see all the ingredients in there, but like the chemistry between the two, I'm almost amazed some network didn't try to give them another show. Like Vicky and Beverly just do whatever. No, she ends up on like Major Dad and did nothing on that show.
Yeah, it's a waste. Although you got to say too, you talk about like you've seen one, you've seen them all. I will say there is some continuity on this series though, which is kind of fascinating. No, number one, kind of with the family members, except for Buzz and Sonia. They never talk about them again. But in season 4, for example, you talked about the Jeopardy episode. So, you have Iola wants to be on Jeopardy, but then it turns out that she's no good in her audition, and then Thelma gets the gig to be on the show, and it's a very fun episode. But at the end of the Jeopardy episode, she wins a trip to Hawaii, and then that leads into a 2-part episode where they shoot on location at a resort in Hawaii. So it's just like those have to go together in the syndication package, I guess. But it's kind of nice that you get things like that here and there, and they'll reference every once in a while family history and things that have happened in the past. And that I appreciate that there's something of a universe being built.
You had to go to Hawaii. That was before everybody started going to Disney World. It was like that was part of the contract. But you're right, because even in prepping for this episode, I never knew the origin of Bubba. If you watch Eunice and you realize, like, wait, Bubba goes back that far and he was a delinquent that long ago. Even though the events of that TV movie aren't necessarily canon, there's a portion, like during Act 3, which is an entirely different, like, decade, like, Bubba disappears for a year. They don't know where he is. He hasn't called home. Philip, who is Thelma's son, who's no longer in continuity but played by Ken Berry, he has actually paid for a private investigator to track Bubba down, and like Bubba just calls out of the blue. But then he has a blow up fight with Eunice where like they both hang up and you don't hear from him again. And then we find out Bubba has a brother, Billy. They're both delinquents. So Billy is in the Raytown jail, but like Bubba, we don't see again until the retool, where it's like, oh, we finally get to see Ed and Eunice's son. Instead of him just being like, oh, this is our nephew from back east who came out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Like they really did like think about it, like who's connected to who and why and what have we mentioned here and there, and we could pick and choose, what we're going to use. But
I mean, if you go to the wiki entry for Mama's Family, there's a family tree. They pretty much adhered to it. It's like, this is how this person is related to this person. And it's really interesting. They built quite the world over the course of really like almost 30 years.
Yeah, now we do have to say this too, again, about the consistency. For better or for worse, the syndicated series never jumps the shark. I mean, like you said, it is the same at the beginning as it is at the end, but like same quality of jokes, same set, same level of plots and all that. But they don't open a restaurant. You know, like the house doesn't burn down. They don't do the thing that you would expect, like, oh, ratings are low. Again, it's syndicated. I understand that it's not the same measure, but at the same time, it's just like they could have said, like, oh, well, we got to freshen it up in season 4. And they don't. They keep it going. And again, usually I campaign for a show to be crazy and do something like that. But they hit on such a comfortable tone, and the comedic rhythm of it all, I find almost hypnotic to watch. When you tune in, it's just like, okay, I'm in the zone with them. It, like you say, once again, just the perfection in the syndicated formula that they achieved makes it so you don't feel like you need, well, you got to give me something new. No, this is fine. As it is, this is great.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the model helped keep them from jumping the shark in that like the episodes were written too quickly for that to happen. I mean, the only other place that goes down, we've briefly talked about like the 1090 deal, and the only person who has figured that out is Tyler Perry. So if you have ever watched House of Pain or Meet the Browns and all this, they never jump the shark, but there's an argument to be made that their existence is the jumping of the shark. And I'm going to get into that in jeers, but it's like it comes down to like when you are filming and writing 100 episodes in one clip, you don't have time for a lot of evolution or character development because there's so few scripted shows created for syndication now. Even if you go back to like Star Trek The Next Generation, there were no like sweeps weeks episodes because they didn't have to cater to advertisers. So it's like you might have an excellent episode where Picard becomes a member of the Borg, and then you have a terrible episode where Worf becomes space paralyzed. But like, is there just this ebb and flow in the season, but there's no delineation of like, oh, this is when things really took off. Although I will say that show got better when Roddenberry died, but we'll cover that if we ever touch on
Someday. Yeah, I will just say, as far as character development goes, the major difference, I guess, between, seasons 1 and 2 and the syndicated version is the Thelma character is a little bit nicer. She is crotchety in the way that she speaks, but you see her heart come through always. She actually does care about everybody. She does actually, though, give an emotional response that isn't just like anger and disgust. Whereas like in the Eunice movie and in a lot of the family sketches, she's just angry and a terrible person. And I like that they did give her, a little bit more humanity in the syndicated version. But yeah, it wasn't all happiness. And in fact, the series focuses often around a lot of family squabbles. And they probably would have been pointing out a lot of jeers. Boo! 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 Like I said, I'm very happy with the version of this series, but the Naomi character, to me, is ruined by the syndicated revamp. Because in the first 2 seasons, she is sexy. She has swagger. She stands toe-to-toe with Mama as the new daughter-in-law who won't take her guff. They were already rivals when she was just a neighbor she hated. Now she's marrying my son. I can't believe it. But she is the only thing I liked about the NBC seasons, because she just, again, when we talked about Punky, the Peacock series, I was like, we needed a Fonzie. To me, Naomi was the Fonzie in the NBC seasons. But in the syndicated version, she becomes everything that Mama used to describe her as to insult her. She becomes a ditzy, whiny bimbo, and I don't like it. She just becomes the annoying one of the cast, and that is a shame to me. Also, I hate her wig. But that's a whole different, story. But she just changes so much. And I didn't know how much better she was because I had never seen those seasons. And then I was like, oh, because I always just kind of wrote Naomi off. I was like, oh, okay, But then I saw how cool she had been. And I'm like disappointed now. So that's a big one for me.
Yeah, she's my least favorite character for all the reasons you mentioned, and maybe it's just my kid brain, but I would look at her and think like she probably smells like feet. Like, it's just my like assessment of her. But like my biggest jeer, and I'm kind of surprised I'm saying this because I wouldn't have said this a week ago, but like having watched Eunice and seeing the power of where this franchise came from and where it went, The lack of Carol Burnett is a problem.
Hmm.
It is. Growing up watching those NBC seasons, I thought she was annoying as hell. I did not like that character. But then when you really get into the meat of like who she is and why she's that way and what she brings to the family, Eunice is the star of the family. Up
Yeah.
until like, because Mama pops out and she does a few zingers, but like it's the Eunice show. So there's a glaring omission when there's no more Eunice. And I mean, I liken it to, and I don't know how many of our listeners are going to follow me with this. I was really into iCarly. And iCarly was a show that came on way after I should have been watching it, but I just like teen programming. And the heart of that show was the character Sam, played by Jeanette McCurdy. Now, Jeanette McCurdy is one of those child stars where like she did not love acting. Like she was forced into it by her parents so she could be like the breadwinner of the family. In fact, she has a best-selling book called I'm Glad My Mom Died. That's how bad it was. So when Paramount Plus brought back iCarly, like in that same punky situation of like, hey, here are these kids you remember, but now they're grown up dealing with grown up issues. Jeanette McCurdy did not participate, and her absence is felt because at the end of the day, it might be named after Carly, but it was Sam's show. And I feel the same thing here. And even if it's not Eunice as a regular cast member, I need more guest appearances like we got in the first 2 seasons, and just like some behind the scenes for listeners wondering like why this happened. So after NBC canceled the show, there was talk about syndicating it, but people weren't really sure. They weren't sure if they could get everybody on board. So the producer of the Carol Burnett show approached Vicki Lawrence. Now, this guy also happened to be going through an acrimonious divorce with Carol Burnett. And he pitches her on like, hey, we can take this into first run syndication. And like, I see that there's like a future for this and whatever. Carol Burnett out of the blue calls Vicki Lawrence and she's like, I've been thinking maybe we could do a syndicated revival kind of like we did with Carol and Company. And Vicki Lawrence is like, I just signed with your husband this morning. And that like destroyed their relationship. They didn't speak almost for like, I think it was something like 25 years. So it was one of those like Carol Burnett was going nowhere near the show at that point, which is why we never see her in the syndicated episodes. So if only they could have buried the hatchet and figured something out. But I will say there's no place for her in the syndicated episodes. But I guess that takes me to another jeer. Having watched Eunice, and like I was saying about syndication and its pace, I don't think the syndicated episodes ever jump the shark. I think they start with the shark in midair. Because it does become wacky, zany, madcap comedy. And if you go back to the Carol Burnett sketches, you go back to Eunice, you go back to the NBC seasons, this is almost like that era's Arrested Development in the sense that, like, you could tell people are like, oh, it's a smart show. And whenever somebody says it's a smart show, that means the ratings are low. Because, like, middle America doesn't want smart shows unless it's Frasier. And that's always because Frasier wasn't in on the joke. But other than that, if you were talking about like family dynamics and things like that, they don't want highfalutin like, oh, let's look at these complicated people's problems and laugh at them. So I now have so much more of an appreciation for everything that came before syndication, where there was a time and a place for it when I was a child, but right now I wouldn't sit down and watch anything from season 3 on.
Oh.
I would gravitate towards Carol Burnett to Eunice. Like, that's where I'm at.
That is fascinating. Yeah, see, because I thought you were going to mention, because do not need Eunice. Like you said, there's no place for her. She would steal the show. She would steal every scene. That was kind of what she was doing in character and out. Carol Burnett just has that energy. But to me, the missing piece, because he was in those early seasons on NBC, is Harvey Korman. I gained such an appreciation for him watching the original Family sketches because he is so likable and he is so fun, even though, sometimes he's scheming around and stuff, but he is. And now this could be just being a middle-aged married white guy, like that I can relate. I don't have that much ambition either, and neither did Ed, and I'm just like, he's just trying to get by. Everybody's like, you could do better, you could do this, you could do that. But also, I just find his presence, he just lifts up every scene, every little just like idiosyncrasy that he adds to his character is so fun, whether they're playing Monopoly or playing charades or whatever they're doing together. And so he is the one that would always make me laugh. And that was a thing for Vicki Lawrence too in the original season. She's like, well, I'll only do it if you have Harvey Korman involved. And he was co-directing the episodes, at least those like first 4 or 5 episodes. So he was very involved in the series, even though he wasn't on camera for every episode. But when he was, I was just so happy to see this Ed character. So he is one that I would have loved to have seen somewhere be more involved later on. Because what was Harvey Korman doing in the late 80s? Nothing. But then you'd have to explain why is Ed there and there's no Eunice. And then he's got to deal with his son, Bubba. But they could have been a funny duo, maybe.
You can explain it because you didn't finish Eunice, did you? He comes back in Act 4 and she thinks that he's trying to get back together when in fact he's trying to get Philip to help him invest in a hardware store. And we find out that he has remarried. So he's still in town with a new wife. So they could have done it. And I'm glad you mentioned him because now you understand my spiritual connection to Harvey Korman. But here's why they couldn't bring him back. And this goes into another jeer of mine. We're just volleying here today. You can't have Ed because you have Vinton. Because they have the same everyman dopey energy.
Yeah.
But I would prefer to have Ed because I prefer the Philip character so much more. Like, while I agree with you, Ken Berry was consistent as Vinton. In Eunice, I keep going back to this, but like it's such a like weird Rosetta Stone of the universe of Mama's Family, the Mamaverse, where like in Eunice, Ken Berry plays her son, but he is not Vinton. He's someone named Philip, and Philip is very like, I don't want to say straight-laced because he's not conservative, but he's the artistic one. He is the writer of the family. So he's gone off to New York. He eventually moves to LA because he's writing the screenplay of one of his books that's being turned into a movie. But having grown up watching Ken Berry as Vinton like my entire life, and I've known him as like a comedic actor because he's also the guy, you may not know this, but when the Andy Griffith Show ends and turns into like Mayberry RFD, Ken Berry becomes the lead of that show.
Oh.
So when Andy Taylor leaves Mayberry, Ken Berry becomes the new Andy Taylor, basically. He's still kind of the straight man there, but he's playing something entirely different in Eunice that's like the antithesis of the goofball he is as Vinton. And there are layers to that character that they never get into because of the times. Like, let's just say they would have called him a lifelong bachelor. And we know what that means now. And there are parts in the movie where like he's about to say it, he's about to bring it out, and you know that family dynamic can't handle that, but you also kind of want to see what's gonna happen when he does come out. Philip was just a better character. So you could still have a Philip and an Ed, but again, Philip doesn't work in the madcap, wacky, syndicated world that they built. I just really hate losing that character.
That is wild. Wow. Yeah. I mean, there's so many woulda, shoulda, couldas with this, final syndicated version that they landed on. But here's the thing, they did end the series, it's just like, well, we got to our magic number. But if they had wanted to extend the life of Mama's Family in some way, I think we have to take a look and present all the options to the patient as the show doctors. as was stated previously, I'll just say this. The show was popular enough, right, that it could have continued. They just made that choice to shut it down. But I praised the series earlier for that consistency, and we've talked about it being evergreen. But after 3 years, I do think they needed a change of pace and scenery. And I would have still ended Mama's Family, but I think you could have done a reunion with some old friends and family members who weren't officially family members anymore. So here's what I'm saying. There was another series that was about to end just a few years later and try to reboot itself, and that was The Golden Girls. Okay, we started out talking about this. B. Arthur was leaving the show, and in 1992, they tried to keep it alive by transforming the series into the Golden Palace, where they're running a hotel and all that. And I think Mama's Family should have ended. Okay, we get one final special, a Mama's Family episode where Thelma wins the lottery. She gives a portion to Vint and Naomi to give to their new baby, and they go off and have a great life. She's gifting Bubba $1 million to make his dreams come true. She's letting Iola have the Harper family home to run as a bed and breakfast in Raytown. And then Thelma is moving to Florida to move into the Golden Palace. And so she is going to move in as a permanent resident of the Golden Palace. You know, she's just going to rent a penthouse and live out the rest of her years. So yes, Mama would jump ship from her own show to become a series regular who could fill the space left by B. Arthur's Dorothy. So, you know, it'd give the rest of the Golden Girls just someone to play off of with a slightly new dynamic. And I think it would have been a fascinating TV experiment because, yeah, I don't think there was anywhere else for the Mama's Family syndicated series to go. But to keep the Mama character alive where she would fit with actors that she had worked with previously, to me, that's a very exciting premise. And if I was old enough to understand all the back and forth of all the actors and how they were connected over the years, that would have gotten me to tune in. But what do you think about that concept, Will?
See, this is one of those situations where I was like, okay, maybe AI is not so bad. Where it's like, we could put in some prompts just to see what happens. I love your enthusiasm. But I'm just like, I think Thelma Harper has Sophia Petrillo energy, and I don't think they can coexist in the same reality. Like, that's kind of my thing. Like, I feel like there would be one zinger against Blanche, and that would be it. It would be one of those great crossovers where maybe they meet in a bar, like network synergy kind of things, like Blackout Thursday, but they can't coexist in the same, because there's also like the social dynamic issues where it's like, we like to think of Mama's Family as Southern when it was really Midwestern. You know, there are conflicting accounts saying that Raytown is in Mississippi, but then it turned out Raytown was in Missouri. So, like, Golden Girls isn't really Southern, but then Florida outside of Orlando and Miami is pretty Southern, and Blanche is pretty Southern. So then it's like, Thelma, is she gonna buddy around with Rose? Because they're kind of close geographically. I would love to see it. Like I said, that's what AI is for, instead of enslaving us. But I don't know. It couldn't have done any worse than Golden Palace on its own.
That's what I'm saying. It was already a doomed concept, so why not add something into the mix that could have made it more interesting? Yeah.
I mean, all that show did was introduce us to a young Don Cheadle. And, like, it was Hotel Rwanda where people were like, oh, that Golden Palace guy can act. You know? So, like...
It gave Cheech some work, too, right?
True. But before Nash Bridges kicked off for the next 25 years or whatever.
Nash Bridges, Cheech. Shaving the mustache. What are you doing, man?
But, like, as far as the syndicated run, it ended when it needed to. If they had kept it going, you have to do the Married with Children, like, oh, the whole last season was a dream sequence, so they can retcon that baby. Because the beauty of that baby is that Tiffany Thelma is born in the series finale. Like, you have seen this consistent family, like you said, that doesn't jump the shark. Things are going to get rocky because people forget that, like, Naomi was old as hell. And yeah. I know because, like, my mom had me at 43. So I know what that baby was in for, you know? And, like, I don't want to watch that. I don't think that goes well. So I think that was the perfect way to cap it off. So if you kept it going, you got to retcon that finale somehow. So I think it ended just like it needed to because times were also changing. You could get away with these, like, reboot, zany first run. Like, this is almost crossing over with the new WKRP and all these like throwaway comedy shows that nobody remembers but us. But like, it really wasn't gonna have staying power past, say, 92. So you maybe could have gotten 2 more syndicated seasons out of it, but it was fine where it was. What I would do is bring it back now that Vicki Lawrence is the actual age of Thelma Harper. I don't even know if I would worry about what do you do with the supporting characters. I mean, I don't know where Dorothy Lyman is. I'm pretty sure Ken Berry died. I don't know. I know that Bubba is doing horror cons because Chad posted a picture of him like not too long ago. So it's like there are actors out there. You could maybe have Tiffany Thelma living with Thelma. You know, that was always kind of like my Amen reboot idea. You know, that whole like generational thing of like, she was born in 90, so she's a millennial. Yeah. So like have her deal with her like old grandma and the culture clash and that kind of thing. But it would go to streaming and they get 10 episodes and it wouldn't go anywhere. And they try to impose modern mechanic to it as far as television goes. So it wouldn't work, but I would like to see it because Vicki Lawrence is still mama. She's one of those like Branson people that like only your grandparents know about, like her and Yakov Smirnoff and all those other people who are just raking it in Branson, Missouri. So the character is still alive and kicking. And I think if nothing else, we should get like a Netflix special. Her stage show is her doing stand-up as mama and then just kind of like memories and anecdotes. So I would love a Netflix special of that.
And I think, honestly, like, take your concept, even if it was 10 episodes, you know, on Peacock. But I think if you did it almost as a, you know, Waiting for Guffman-esque, you know, like it is like partially improvised because Vicki Lawrence is that quick. Like, she has that type of attitude and she's so in sync with the character that, yeah, if you bring on a lot of improv trained actors to go along with her, I think you would have something special doing that. Like, improv TV, it freshens up the concept rather than a classic sitcom throwback.
So it'd be like, whose Thelma is it anyway? And you have like Wayne Brady and Colin Mockery, Ryan Stiles.
There's my Drew Carey Show crossover. Put Mama on Drew Carey Show. I'm fine with that.
She could be Mimi's mom.
Oh, one more member of the Harper family. But yeah, so I mean, this has been pretty wild. It's been great to enjoy our time with these families, conventional and unconventional, functional and dysfunctional, throughout the Thanksgiving season. That's what it's all about for a lot of people. But now we're getting into the Christmas season. It is the season of giving and goodwill. And hey, we have a goodwill on this podcast. I want to give him a gift, and that gift is free choice. Anything that has been in his mind for this show, thinking we got to wait till the timing's right, or we got to find this, we got to find that. But your heart's deepest desire, the show that you want to talk about, this is my gift to you. What are we going to talk about this Christmas season?
Let's do it. Team Knight Rider.
Wow! Finally, from the beginning, you've been pitching this. Wow, this
Team Knight Rider.
Okay, what I've never seen. So I have not experienced Team Knight Rider. I remember seeing promos back in the day, but that's as far as I went.
But I mean, it's the season of giving, so I mean, I can't leave you empty-handed. Like, so I bestow upon you the same gift. I open it up, and it's time for the show you've been waiting for.
That is so kind. There's some sweet wrapping here. I'm gonna pull it apart, and what's inside? Hey, it's a translucent kind of pyramid-shaped cube, and it's opening and it's speaking to me from another planet because we're gonna talk about Out of This World. I bring it up here and there because it is always on my mind. Evie and everybody involved in that universe, there's so much to get into. So yeah, I can't wait to share Out of This World with you, Will, and get your memories and thoughts on that. So look forward to it, everybody. Stay tuned, but stay connected on social media. We're at Remember Show Pod. Of course, you can also find us on the Geekster Vision YouTube channel, so you can get over there. And if you prefer to stream on YouTube, listen to us that way as well. But I also go over to geekstermedia.com and you can check out all the great things that are going up there. You know, enjoy, find other shows. You know, I'm on a lot of them. Why not? If you like what I'm doing, I'm happy to bring you some entertainment. But either way, thank you so much for checking this out. Until next time, we're changing the channel.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.